This video has been a monster to get done. I've had to do several rewrites and re-recordings because honestly, I just haven't felt like anything was good enough to give to you guys. But right now, it's about 10 a.m. on the Friday this is supposed to go up, and I have until 5 p.m. to post something, so we're doing one final rewrite and re-recording to get this done. Basically, y'all just give me some love on this because I honestly don't ever want to look at Inazuma ever again, so hopefully this is good enough for you guys. With all of that being said, the history of Inazuma is filled with strife, war, and betrayals. Honestly, it reads like something straight out of the Genpei War. But, as always, the best place to start is at the beginning. So, let's get into it. As a brief preface, in my other videos you'll note my mention of the Great War. This is traditionally thought to be a war fought between the Primordial One, the Second Who Came, and the King of the Dragon Sovereigns. But there's some evidence to suggest that either before or after the defeat of the Dragon Sovereigns that the Primordial One and the Second Who Came might have fought each other. There's also some theories that suggest the King of the Dragon Sovereigns might actually be the Second Who Came, but partially because I don't really like that theory, and also due to it being unconfirmed, we will be continuing on with my established timeline, meaning the Great War was basically Celestia v Dragons Part 2, Electric Boogaloo, and just accept that at some point the Second Who Came was defeated in some sort of battle with Celestia. In Inazuma, the human civilization that was most active during this time was Enkanomiya. Enkanomiya was once a civilization of humans that experienced prosperity and direct connections with Celestia. This civilization also likely had some connections to the lost civilization in the Liyue Chasm due to similarities in architecture. However, as with most things in Teyvat, the good times couldn't last, and thus Enkanomiya, in a great disaster, sunk beneath the waves. Enkanomiya has a rich history, and it'll get its own deep dive video at some other point in time, but what's important for our purposes for today is to know that Urabashi was the one who would ultimately lead the people back to the surface during the Archon War, and these people would ultimately become the people of Watatsumi Island. There were also a couple other groups of humans scattered around the Inazuman Islands as well, but in the end they all either died or dwindled slowly into obscurity, so we're just not going to be talking about them too much. Around 5,300 years ago, the Tanuki native to the Inazuman Islands gained sentience, and it's also around this time that the Kitsune from the mainland of Teyvat began to come to Inazuma to colonize it. Due to this, naturally a conflict arose between the Tanuki and the Kitsune, because the Tanuki were like, "Bitch, this is our land," and the Kitsune were like, "LMAO, do you have a flag?" By the way, shout out to anyone in the comments who gets that reference. After 1,600 years of fighting, England and France wished they could be this petty, the Tanuki and the Kitsune came to a truce. While the Tanuki deny having lost, they do lose the Sakura tree to the Kitsune. Also, we'll come back to the sacred Sakura tree because it's kind of a time anomaly, and I'll get to it later, so just put a pin in it for now. Apparently, due to this war and the constant shapeshifting, each side began to forget what their original forms looked like, and this is supposedly how Inazuman humans came to be. The lands that were won by the Kitsune became known as the Hakushin lands, which is confusing because there's also a Kitsune of that same name, but we're just gonna gloss over that for now. Both Raiden A and her twin sister Makoto were born from divine lightning, and upon their discovery the Kitsune became their servants and messengers. It's during this time that the Grand Narukami Shrine was built around the sacred Sakura and the Shogun was worshipped by the Kitsune. Hakushin became one of their 6 apprentices during this time. It should be noted, during this time both Makoto and A did rule over Inazuma. While in Liyue and Mondstadt there is a clear delineation between the end of the interim period and the start of the Archon War, things are not so simple in Inazuma. Inazuma was a land embroiled in conflict. Yokai, seeing the poverty and suffering of humans, lent them some of their power to help them build cities in the mountains and near the sea, once again showing that the yokai apparently care more about the people than A ever will. Makoto and A also fought to unite the islands under the Narukami banner. A was the more skilled fighter, but recognizing that Makoto was the more skilled ruler at some point during the Archon War, knowing that she had to ensure her sister's status, A sacrifices her body so that her sister could ascend to Celestia. Makoto then becomes the first Electro Archon and the first God of Eternity. As an Archon, she recalls A's divine will and forges her a new body. With this, A becomes her Kage Musha, or Shadow Warrior, and fights for her, though the people of Inazuma gain the impression that there's only one god ruling over them. During this time, the people of Watatsumi and Inazuma live in a fragile peace. Urabashi also had the people of Watatsumi Island adapt to the culture and language of Narukami Island to allow for easier integration into the surface world. This is likely why there are some Japanese cultural influences in Enkonomiya, but there's also Greek cultural influences as well. Around 2,000 years ago, Kitsune Saigu is born, and with her, a Bake Tanuki known as Ioroi became friends. They often competed with each other and played pranks on one another. One of these pranks ends with Ioroi becoming the protector of Chinju Forest. It's around this time also that due to the infertility of the soil on Watatsumi, the Watatsumi people begin experiencing widespread famine and disease. So they decide, you know those people with gods that shoot lightning out of their dicks? Yeah, we want their land. And Urabashi was like, fuck, my children are stupid, but fine, and reluctantly agreed to invade Yashinori Island. This kicks off a bloody war between the people of Watatsumi Island and the shogunate. The end of this battle results in the death of Urabashi at Ei's hands and the devastation to both Inazuman, though mostly Watatsumi sides. The only major player on the shogunate side to be killed in action is the Tengu Sasayori, but not before Homegirl absolutely tore the Watatsumi Island resistance a new one. On the Watatsumi side, we have Shrine Maiden Mon, who could command a whale to attack the shogunate. Great start. She and her subordinates were killed by Sasayori's forces. Not a great end. Umegozen Ayame was the twin sister to Mon and was in charge of the navy. She disappeared with her fate remaining unknown. Akuko was perhaps the most successful out of everyone on the Watatsumi side due to having taken over one of the mountains on Yashinori Island, but he was ultimately killed in the crossfire of the same attack that killed Urabashi. Now, there is some indication that this war was preordained and that Urabashi's death was a certainty. Due to Urabashi leading the people of Enkonomiya back to the surface, Celestia gave Urabashi a choice: have the people of Enkonomiya suffer their sins and transgressions, or take it all upon itself, sparing the people. Urabashi chose to take on all the sins of the people of Enkonomiya, which sealed its fate to one of death, which would come true in the Archon War. In exchange, the people of Enkonomiya would be taken under the power of Celestia again, allowing them to live freely in the surface world. This could also be why Tatarigami leaks from Urabashi's body, requiring multiple rituals and seals to quell its effects on the land. This era is filled with arguably more peace, but not by much. The Thunderbird meets a young boy named Ru on Tsurumi Island, and they become good friends. Ru sings beautifully, which is what originally attracted the bird to the boy. Having forgotten her name, the boy decides to give her the name Kana, and the two promise to see each other again. Tsurumi Island was seen as a wasteland by many people, and so people from the tribe began to move away. But due to the immense fog on the island, many people thought the others were just wandering off to be kidnapped by the Thunderbird. Ru volunteers to be a sacrifice to the Thunderbird so that the kidnapped people can return, because, you know, that's how that works. Instead, the bird is enraged by his death and kills everyone on the island, because seriously, what did you think was going to happen? The Thunderbird then forces the island to replay the moment of its destruction over and over again so that she can hear Ru sing once more. At some point, this bird flies over Serai Island, where it's killed and sealed by A. Some slightly less horrific things that happened during this time period are as follows. The unnamed author of the New Chronicles of the Six Kitsune is born, and Saigu challenges the Great Tengu to a foot race, which he loses and then has to become her bodyguard, something I'm sure he was absolutely thrilled with. You can see where Yai got her attitude from. Pre-Cataclysm, there aren't too many events to take note of. The Mikawa Flower Festival happens, and Yai is born. Yai moves to Narukami to go to the shrine out of her admiration for Kitsune Saigu, and this puts her in A and Makoto's inner circle, though she is significantly younger than the rest of the group. In the years leading up to the Cataclysm, though only likely a few short years before the start of the Cataclysm given the humans involved, several events happen simultaneously. Nagamasa is adopted into the Mikoshi clan, and Asase Hibiki moves to the Narukami Shrine to receive training. The former two, along with Kamuna Harunosuke, learn from the Yogu Tengu and become known as the Yogu Tengu III. Asase also learns true magic from the Tengu. What is true magic? We don't know. I couldn't find any references to what that could possibly be, so... But apparently Asase knows it. Takamine the Mist-Splitter challenges the Great Tengu to a duel which ends in a tie. Takamine learns much from the Tengu, and in exchange for his bow, Takamine becomes his servant for several years. He also becomes a renowned swordsman and teaches Asase Hibiki some of his techniques. The final thing to note is that Kitsune Urakusai does something so horrible that he is banished by Kitsune Saigu. While his deed has been lost to history, it's likely that it involved something with the Abyss, as Kitsune Saigu relocated to Tenshukaku to prepare for the imminent invasion of the Abyss in Inazuma right after his banishment. The Cataclysm was disastrous for all the nations of Teyvat, but as far as personal losses go, no one was hit as hard as Raiden A. Her friends fell in battle all around her. Chiyo Mikoshi became infected by corruption and turned her blade on her friend. A defeated her, but her fate remains unknown as she ran off before A was able to finish their fight. Saigu was also consumed by corruption and killed, though some of her untainted memories lived on in the form of Hana Chirusato. Additionally, for an unknown reason, Makoto goes to Conria alone, leaving A to defend Inazuma. By the time A catches up with her, Makoto has been slain, though her consciousness would become the sacred Sakura tree, and through time shenanigans, the sacred Sakura tree would be planted thousands of years in the past. Everyone but A always had the memory of it being in Inazuma. I swear one day I'll make a more comprehensive Istaroth video and touch on how all this time bullshit links back to her and everything else in Teyvat, but again, that is going to be a video for another day. The Sacred Sakura is one of the reasons A was able to have the strength to defend Inazuma and defeat the monsters of the Abyss. Takamine also, over the course of fighting abyssal monsters, enters the Abyss and becomes missing in action. After the Cataclysm, when A returned to Inazuma, due to the death of Makoto, she took over as the Electro Archon. In her grief, and after realizing that eternity might be unreachable, A decided to forge a puppet for herself to hide away in so that her mind may never be corrupted by corrosion. Of course, this means she had to make a prototype. And then, because he cried, she decided to seal his powers and yeet him into the forest, because, you know, Mom of the Year award goes to A. A does leave the puppet, who would become known as the Kabuki Mono, with a golden feather adornment, which would grant him an audience with her should he need it. A also establishes the Tri-Commissions, which is made up of the Tenryou Commission, the Yashiro Commission, shout out to the one commission that doesn't turn into an absolute fucking shit show, and the Kanjo Commission, which effectively becomes the new government of Inazuma. Mikoshi Michihiro, who was Chiyo's biological son, locks himself away in seclusion, ashamed over his mother's actions, while Nagamasa becomes the overseer of Tadasuna. The great Tengu also departs from the mortal world, ashamed at being unable to protect Kitsune Saigu. Mikoshi Michihiro eventually meets Teruyo, and she bestows the name Iwakura to him, leaving his family name behind. During their 10th duel, 13 years later, Michihiro finally beats her, and she gives him the title Tengu Victor, and disappears so that she can focus on responsibilities to her clan. Iwakura would then go on to develop the Iwakura art sword style, and become the sword instructor for the Kujo clan. Iwakura develops the Tengu sweeper techniques, and A creates a series of Magu Kenki puppets as failed prototypes, modeled after his fighting style and memories as she quests to create the perfect puppet. During this time, or around this time, the Yogu 3 part ways, never to see each other again. Asase Hibiki returns to the Asase Shrine on Serai Island, where she eventually joins a rebellion against the shogunate, led by Aku Domeki. She does this because Ako Domeki reminds her of Takamine, and uses her magic to release the seals over Serai Island, which releases the lingering hatred of the Thunderbird. This manifests as a huge electrostorm over the center of the island, which fragmented Serai Island, and swept both natives and the shogunate far from the island. The shogunate then comes back to evacuate the people of Serai Island, relocating them to Narukami Island. Though the immediate area surrounding the Asase Shrine is unaffected by the hatred, the shrine is left abandoned save for the cats around the shrine. Sometime before Asase's final fate, Takamine returns from the abyss and stops when he sees Asase, though she cuts him down, ending his life, likely because he was infected by abyssal corruption. Ako Domeki defeats a Magu Kenki doll and steals it, but becomes shipwrecked on the Golden Apple Archipelago where the puppet is left behind. Around this time, Ioroi, who was tricked by Kitsune Saigu into staying away from the conflict of the Cataclysm, believes that the Kitsune must be hiding from him, so he begins to break Kitsune dolls all over Narukami Island. Ultimately, Harunosuke seals Ioroi and many of the other Tanuki into stone statues. A finally manages to create a puppet known only as the Shogun, and instills the rules of eternity into the puppet, which will lead Inazuma down a dark path because, you know, when does that not happen? She discards her physical body and seals herself in the plane of Euphymia, because again, nothing says responsible ruler like deciding to abandon your people. Also, to all the A lovers out there, I will say I clearly have a bias against her. That being said, despite the fact that I heavily dislike her, I don't think she's a badly written character, and I do understand that she is very complex and honestly really well written, and I can see why people like her, but as an FYI, there will be more slander to come. Kabuki Mono is found by the people of Tataratsuna and for a time lives with Niwa Hisahide and the Makoshi clan, where he learns to forge weapons. Then an engineer from Fontaine introduces new technologies to the forge, which causes Tataragami to begin pouring out of the forge, causing sickness and death to spread to the people of Tataratsuna. Kabuki Mono attempts to venture to the shogunate to ask for help, but by this point, A has sealed her consciousness away in her sword, sealing that in turn away inside the puppet, and the puppet decides to give zero fucks about what's happening in Tataratsuna. I know, we're all shocked. The Gnosis had been given to Yai Miko for safekeeping by this point. Yai attempts to send aid to the Kabuki Mono, but they are shipwrecked, and ultimately the Kabuki Mono is forced to enter the furnace with a device to clear it of corruption and save everyone. Unfortunately, the engineer, who was Dotere, tricked him into believing that the device he held was the heart of a servant that his best friend Niwa had killed before he ran away, causing the Kabuki Mono to become disgusted. Kabuki Mono would find a small child whose parents had been killed by the forge, and would attempt to make a promise with the child that neither of them would be left alone, because, you know, that's how mortality works. But when the child succumbed to the sickness of the furnace, the Kabuki Mono believed that all of humanity was scum and basically allowed the hate to flow through him. See, this is why we don't yeet our children away, because we're going through some things. In fact, I'd argue we just don't make children when we're going through some things. But again, A isn't winning any Mother of the Year awards. He then leaves to wander Inazuma for a while, becoming known as Kunikazushi, Country Destroyer for anyone curious as to what that name means, which, my guy, I'm willing to excuse most of the bullshit that you do, but that name is so unbelievably lame. Like, I'm talking 12-year-old in Hot Topic levels of lame. So, around 100 years ago, Kunikazushi masterminds the fall of the Raiden Gokuden because he hates Niwa for his perceived cowardice. He comes to regret that later when he finds out that Niwa intended to sacrifice himself, Dotere killed him, and the device that protected Kabuki Mono all those years ago was in fact Niwa's heart because, and I cannot stress this enough, Dotere might genuinely be the worst person in all of Genshin. He destroys 3 of the 5 schools, but then spares the descendants of Niwa for some reason. And this descendant is worried that Kunikazushi will come back and kill his family, which, honestly, fair. So he stops bladesmithing, which leads to the dying Ishin art. This leads to the Kaitahara clan's eventual collapse and Kazua's current predicament. As a result of the destruction of what were seen as cultural institutions, the Kamisato clan lost a lot of power, though Yai Miko stopped them from being punished too severely by the shogunate. Also, at some point prior to this, Kunikazushi becomes Scaramouche of the Fatui Harbingers. Around 30 years before the start of the game, Teijima arrives in Konda village and uses his vision to protect it. This is one of the guys that will lose his vision and his memories later on in the game. 10 years ago, the Kamisato clan is thrown into turmoil when the clan head and his wife die, leaving Ayato and Ayaka in a vulnerable position. Ayato advises Toma, their servant, I guess, to leave while he can, but Toma refuses, which causes him to gain his vision. Eventually, though, through the careful machinations of Ayato Kamisato, the Kamisato clan regains its reputation and strength, and he does this to protect both Toma and Ayaka. 1 year before the start of the game, the Fatui managed to pull strings in the corrupt tri-commissions, leading to the Sakoku Decree, which stops people from coming and going from Inazuma. Additionally, the Vision Hunt Decree is put into place, and no new Electra Visions are given out. A is aware that the Fatui is doing this, but apparently the suffering of her people isn't enough for her to care about doing anything because it doesn't hinder eternity, so she decides to continue to fuck off in her little consciousness realm. Meanwhile, stuff is messed up in Inazuma. The statue of the omnipresent god is started, and that's possibly yet another reference to Istaroth, but again, video for another day. The Sangonomiya resistance is formed to resist the Vision Hunt Decree, essentially plunging Inazuma into a civil war. Kaitahara Kazua's friend tried to stand up to the shogun, but got obliterated by Kujo Sara, and then by extension, the shogun herself. Kazuha took his vision and escaped as a wanted criminal. Tataragami begins spreading because the Fatui tricked the Watatsumi resistance into breaking the seals on Orobashi, because why not add a little bit more chaos for flavor? The Tatarigami in the forge of Tataratsuna causes it to malfunction, causing the production of arms to grind to a halt and an evacuation order to be put into place. Which leads us to the present day, when the Traveler shows up, manages to fix everything, kills Signora, rest in pieces bitch, that's what you get for kicking my homeboy Venti, and Scaramouche manages to gain a Gnosis before escaping from Inazuma. And there you have it, the most complete history of Inazuma up through the end of the Archon quest. Thankfully, this isn't as long as my Mondstadt video, at least I hope. I haven't checked the time yet, and I did pronounce things better in this video. So I hope you all enjoyed it. Like, subscribe, comment, do all the things so I know I'm not screaming into the void, and may the wind bless your travels.